This is part 2 of Chapter 20, Unavoidable Fate, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. As Sadra spiraled toward annihilation, its story unfolded in real time across Wolf-Rayet 124. People watched in horror as entire nations fell to military juntas, as civil liberties were stripped away, as power-hungry warmongers amassed arsenals, preparing for the inevitable. The fear was palpable, and when the moment finally came, when nuclear fire erased Sadra from existence, when the last human on the world died choking on ash, something far more dangerous began to take root. Faith in survival collapsed. For centuries, humanity had clung to the belief that they could carve out a future beyond Earth, but as they witnessed the destruction of their sister colony, millions on Wolf-Rayet 124 lost that belief. They saw their fate written in the ruins of Sadra. They saw the pattern. They saw doom. And in that abyss of hopelessness, one man saw an opportunity. Lawrence Holt was not a man of faith. He was not a visionary, nor a savior. He was, at his core, a psychopath, a man who had spent his life yearning for unrestricted, absolute power, but had never found the right moment to seize it. That moment had now arrived. He understood something most did not. People without hope will follow anyone who promises them meaning. And so he gave them one. He forged a religion from the ashes of Sadra, a doctrine that twisted despair into devotion. His movement did not deny the inevitable. It embraced it. The end of humanity was a certainty, he preached. The great filters were not accidents or failures. They were divine trials, and only those who submitted to his vision could attain true salvation. At first, his sect was a fringe movement, a curiosity, a whisper in the dark. But as the weeks turned to months, as the reality of Sadra's obliteration continued to haunt people, Holt's influence grew at an exponential rate. Desperate citizens flocked to his teachings, yearning for an answer to the creeping sense of dread. Within a decade, his cult had swelled into millions. His words were no longer ignored. They were recited in homes, in public forums, in schools. The movement no longer lurked in the shadows. It stood openly in defiance of the government, demanding recognition. By the 10th anniversary of Sadra's destruction, the cult was no longer a religion. It was the government. Another decade passed, and the last remnants of Wolf-Rayet 124's former leadership collapsed without bloodshed. Holt had no need for war. He had won the minds of the people. His rule was not imposed by force, but by faith. His teaching had become the law. He was the law. Lawrence Holt was a singularity, a mind so sharp it could cut through the fabric of human perception, a man so cunning he could forge devotion from despair. He did not merely lead, he orchestrated. He was not merely worshipped, he was adored. To the public, he was a beacon of hope, a visionary who had restored faith in the face of oblivion. His doctrine, built on rejection of dependence on technology, preached a return to nature, to simpler ways of life. He encouraged his followers to toil under the open sky, to work the fields with their bare hands, to build with sweat and will rather than cold, lifeless machines. For a time, it worked. Productivity soared. Morale rose. The people of Wolf-Rayet 124 felt alive again, more connected to their world than ever before. They abandoned their digital comforts for the tangible, for the sensation of soil beneath their nails, for the purity of human effort. Holt had crafted a society that believed itself renewed, but in reality he had done nothing but enslave them. He did not live as they did. Behind the walls of his hidden sanctuaries, Holt embraced technology more than any ruler before him. In secret, he constructed the most advanced laboratories in the history of the planet, facilities that would allow him to shape reality as he saw fit. His followers believed in humility, in sacrifice, but he believed in domination. And he knew exactly who stood in his way. A single nation resisted him. Tucked away in a remote, frigid region, rich in mineral resources, this country had never shared the despair that had made Holt's rise possible. Its people had found balance. They worked hard, but they reaped the rewards. Prosperity flourished. Their wealth made them independent. Their success made them resilient. And most damning of all, their minds were untouched by fear. They did not need Holt, and that made them his enemy. When the global government fell under his command, they alone refused to submit. They did not protest, they did not wage war. They simply continued as they always had, rejecting Holt's divine rule. But in Holt's world, neutrality was not an option. Holt was not content with control. He did not seek obedience. He sought absolute domination. And so, in the darkness of his laboratories, he designed the ultimate control weapon: invisible, undetectable nanobots, small and light enough to be inhaled through the respiratory system and enter the bloodstream. Each one a microscopic executioner, waiting only for a signal, a single pulse from orbit, and they would activate, shutting down organs, severing neural pathways, extinguishing life itself. His scientists ran tests on small remote villages, quiet exterminations, unnoticed by the world. It worked flawlessly. When the time came, he would drown his enemies in silence, leaving no trace of murder but the absence of breath. But why stop there? Why limit his dominion to one nation when he could wield the power of life and death over every human being? And so he did. The nanobots were deployed planet-wide, an invisible veil of death embedded in the lungs of every man, woman, and child. Holt had achieved what no ruler in human history had ever dared dream. He was now a god. With a keystroke, he could erase a single life. With a command, he could shape destiny itself. The digital database of his rule was no longer a census. It was the software of existence. And on that fateful day, he made his decree. He selected 6 million names, every citizen of the defiant nation. With a single action, he would erase them from history, silence their defiance, and cement his rule over the world. He pressed the command, and then he learned why no man should play God. The system failed. His scientists had never tested the full scale of execution. 6 million deaths in an instant. The system could not process it. It overflowed. A flood of errors cascaded through the network. The command could not stop at 6 million. It did not stop at all. The silent execution order rippled through the database, consuming name after name, an unstoppable chain reaction of death. In mere seconds, the nanobots activated in every living being. Across the planet, humanity collapsed. People fell where they stood. Farmers gasping in the fields, workers choking in factories, children dropping lifeless in schools. There was no warning, no resistance, no escape. The streets became graveyards. Cities turned to silent tombs. Holt watched from his command room as his paradise, his kingdom, his world, withered and died before his eyes. He had created a god machine, but it did not serve him. It did not recognize its master. 10 minutes. That was all it took. When the final breath was drawn, when the last heart seized its rhythm, when not a single human voice remained, the world was still. Wolf Rayet 124 was dead, and so was his god. The VY Canis Majoris was on the verge of its final destination. After centuries adrift in the abyss, 5 years was nothing, a single breath in the vast span of time. They were so close, so impossibly close, that the settlers had begun to speak of the planet below as though they had already set foot upon its soil. Then the news arrived. Wolf Rayet 124 was gone. Not a slow decay like Rigel 1, not the political chaos of Sadra, nor the corporate disease of Nagus. This was something different, something worse, a nightmare of human design, an extinction event brought forth not by the cold indifference of the universe, but by a single man's ambition. A press of a button, a command line executed, and in mere minutes an entire civilization had vanished. No one could comprehend it. With that final cataclysmic failure, the weight of the past crushed down upon the crew of VY Canis Majoris. 3 colonies lost had been tragedy enough, but now, after 4 generations of sacrifice, 4 distant worlds swallowed by failure, how could they believe that they would be the exception? Hope, which had survived through war, famine, exodus, and the terrible silence of deep space, finally began to fracture. The administrators tried to quell the fear, issuing reassurances through ship-wide broadcasts. They spoke of perseverance, of duty, of the dream their ancestors had entrusted to them. The other generational ships joined in, messages arriving from across the time-dilated network, words of encouragement, calls for unity, voices pleading for them to hold on just a little longer. But something had taken root in VY Canis Majoris, something insidious and irreparable. Perhaps it was the proximity to their destination, the knowledge that they had spent so long in the dark only to arrive at the brink of ruin. Perhaps it was something deeper, something in their bones, in the marrow of a people who had lived for centuries aboard metal corridors, with the promise of land and sky always just beyond reach. Whatever it was, it could not be undone. The first suicide was met with quiet horror. A single loss was devastating enough. Life on a generational ship was more than precious. It was sacred. Then came another, and another. By the end of the week, 20 had taken their own lives. 20. There was no time to grieve, no time to process. The entire time-dilated network turned its attention to VY Canis Majoris, the remaining ships pleading, reaching out with every ounce of support they could offer. Messages flooded in, friends and distant relatives speaking through the vast silence of space, trying to remind them that they were not alone, that they would endure, that this did not have to be their end. And yet, no matter how many voices spoke, no matter how many hands tried to hold them together, the people of VY Canis Majoris could not be consoled. The despair had settled too deeply. The end, it seemed, had already begun. That was part 2 of Chapter 20, Unavoidable Fate, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.